today we launch a new series called Exit Stories, where I sit down with the founders and entrepreneurs of Amazon-centric brands that have gone to 7, 8 figures and beyond and sold their business. This is the human side of entrepreneurship. This is the stuff that matters. This is Exit Stories. Let's kick this off. I recently invested in one of the top Amazon aggregators, D1 Brands, offering top valuations, 9 figures raised, and a 100% close rate. If you're ever looking to exit, check out d1brands.io or email acquisitions@d1brands.io. Okay, guys, well, welcome to the inaugural Exit Stories interview series, where we are going to dive into the human side of the entrepreneurs behind Amazon FBA businesses that have gone through building their business and ultimately exiting their business. So I'm really excited about it, and I'm super stoked to have Fernando and Nick, a couple OGs in the Amazon space, and we'll get into their story and how they've been involved in Amazon across the board. But first of all, guys, they always say that the first is one of the better ones, so it's great to have you guys on to kick this series off.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having us.
Cool. So obviously you guys built up a pretty substantial fleet of Amazon brands. You've exited. We'll get into all the ins and outs of that experience, both emotional and just kind of the business side of things. I always like to start with origin stories and just kind of understanding how people get into the Amazon game. And I think that there's a lot of motivations and a lot of reasons, and people from really all walks of life have found success with Amazon. So let's maybe turn the time clock back to kind of pre-Amazon, and maybe each of you guys can maybe just talk about a little bit about what you did before Amazon and what was the motivation to get into the space.
So I could start. So Nick and I met actually back in college, and so we were actually in the same business fraternity. We were big bro, little bro, and we always actually got along, like actually through partying of all things. And after college, you actually get more serious and you start like developing your career. It's just funny, like looking back, both of us started off in corporate because that was like the thing to do, out of college. We both hated it. And then so we decided to like work at a startup together. We both quit our jobs at the same time. It was, this like, hot LA startup at the time. And we were actually like cold calling like restaurants, like at the same time that like Yelp and Groupon were, where we'd only get like 20 to like $25 at close. We were basically living off credit cards. It was actually pretty sad in the grand scheme of things. The funny thing was that like that the company ended up not doing so hot, but we both went off to do our own separate things, where I think we both learned a ton. For me, I ended up joining as a director of sales and then got promoted to head of sales at a company called AnyPerk, which is like a YC or like a Y Combinator backed company out of San Francisco. Basically got to go from like zero to like millions in revenue, and hired up probably about like 70% of the team. That's a little bit of what I did before Amazon.
Yeah. And then for me, once, Fernando and I, we parted ways, which is very sad, by the way. I also joined a startup called TaskUs. They actually IPO'd just this year, but I joined them as employee 6. I headed up their new business, acquiring new business, building a pipeline of leads. And they were actually an outsourcing company. And so it's funny because, they started off as an outsourcing company, service all these large internet companies. And it was actually the basis of how we started building our own team overseas as well, because we realized there was so much good talent overseas. And we had such good hands-on experience figuring out how to leverage that because of this company that I came from. That's kind of where I came from. I guess, I'm happy to dive into how we went and did Amazon from there. Does that work for you?
No, I think so. Maybe one thing I just want to hit on, and we'll roll. I think it'll be a good kind of lead into the Amazon story piece. But like, I think it's super intriguing, and I see a lot of this, especially with people that have done really well in the Amazon space that had that corporate background. And like, I'm sure the outside looking in, I'm sure your parents and like buddies of yours and other people like in your circle of life, so to speak, that are looking like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're working for these kick-ass startups. Like, you graduated from college, you're in California. Like, what do you have to be unhappy about? And I think a lot of people struggle with leaving that behind, because even when stuff's really good, like sometimes 70% good isn't good enough, and you kind of have that itch. So I'm just curious if you guys can maybe talk through overcoming that, or did you experience that? And like, cause it's a pretty big leap when things are not bad. It's not like you're, living under a bench and need to radically change your life, but it was like this dull itch that you guys had that kind of made you do that. So maybe talk through that, and that would maybe be a good lead into the foray into Amazon.
Yeah, I would say that Fernando and I, in college, we had probably been in that bubble where we thought we wanted to be in finance or consulting. I think that's natural when you're in college because that's what you see as like the highest achieving job that you can get out of there. But it's funny, like our friend Sean, he was like, hey, you should read this book. It's called The 4-Hour Workweek. And so both he and I, Fernando and I, we read that book. And it was literally like the lights went off. We took I think it's a red pill, and everything exploded. We realized like it was just a sucker's game, at least from our perspective. And so I think very early on, we realized, okay, this is actually the path that we want to go down. This is really the winning path for us and what we want to do. That really, changed the way we looked at how we garnered experience for ourselves. I think from that point on, we always looked at work as really an opportunity to lead us down that path rather than that being the end goal. And so whenever we found that, that career path didn't really serve us, that's why we were willing to quit our corporate jobs to take a pure sales role, because we saw it as an opportunity to actually build a really key skill and also learn from people who are great leaders and people who have actually done it before.
Cool. Love it. Same kind of thing for you, Fernando, or any different take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think the only difference maybe for me was I actually took the finance job, which was, in 2009, 2010, which was like just devastatingly sad. And then, I think it was looking up at the partners within the firm, and you just realize like, whoa, like they don't seem happy. I don't like all the people that I really, really respect here are usually like tied to this company because of visas. Like, I just don't want to be there. And I don't want to like spend the next 30 to 40 years of my life, like getting to this place where they don't seem that like fulfilled or doing something that interesting, to be honest. And then, so it was just like, get me out of here as quickly as possible. And it took me a while to figure out what that was. But yeah, I'm just like so thankful.
Cool. So what year did you get into Amazon, and maybe walk me through that initial stages and ultimately leaving your day jobs to pursue Amazon potentially, and what that whole path was like?
So in terms of how we got into Amazon, well, basically, Fernando and I, we reached this end point at our previous roles at those startups, and we, I remember him swinging through, and we had this long lunch, and I was like, hey, dude, I'm ready to start a new thing. I don't know how you're feeling. And he kind of nodded his head, and we were at that table. We kind of made the decision, okay, let's actually do this, because that was always the plan. And so we started like meeting up on weekends. That was when he lived in SF at that point. And we were trying to think, like I would go to SF, he would come to LA, and we pulled together like $20,000 each without an idea of what we wanted to do. We hadn't quit our jobs yet. And so fortunately, we had an incredible circle of friends, and one of them had done really incredibly well with e-commerce. He actually, at 21, sold his first business for tens of millions of dollars, and so wow. He was like, hey, look, e-commerce is really exploding. Maybe this is something you should look into. At that point, because we were involved with tech companies, we came to quickly realize that, neither Fernando and I have tech backgrounds. And for us to really compete at that level, we had to have some kind of engineering background. So really, it wasn't like a level playing field for us.
Yeah.
And e-commerce was something we could figure out. It was something that made sense to us. And so we actually started a business. Originally, it was like its own Shopify site. And that was like a men's lifestyle, site modeled after a really popular one that's actually big now. And so we actually did that for about 6 months, and we did a good job bringing users, buying products. We were negotiating with brands. But at a certain point, we realized, wow, in order for us to be profitable, because we had actually decided to bootstrap the company entirely, in order for us to be profitable, this is like a 10-year horizon. We don't even know if we have enough money to actually make this work. And so, or we'd have to raise money. And at the same time, Fernando was negotiating with these brands, trying to get them into our shop. And they were just so difficult to work with. And these were like tiny brands. And so one day, the doorbell rings, and at this point, Fernando moved down to LA, so we were working in my loft in this corner office. And the doorbell rings, and then the Amazon guy comes and he drops off these office supplies that I had picked up or purchased. And suddenly, like a light went off in my head. I was like, "Wow, I buy everything on Amazon. Like, there must be a way for us to sell the things that these brands are selling to us, but on Amazon. And because they're branded, like." They can't drop their price, but on Amazon, I'm sure we could, do well in terms of our price point, they wouldn't want to compete with us. And people just look at reviews. So sure enough, we kind of did our research. And we found like amazing. We actually like pirated the course and then, went through it, and it really like blew our mind. So 6 months into this project that we were already working on, we were like, okay, let's source our first set of products. We source these products that we don't sell now. But yeah, I mean, within the first, I would say like 3 months, Fernando, we did more revenue in month 3 than we did in all 6 months combined. And that was when we realized, wow, we actually have month 1. Yeah. So month 1. And that's when we realized, wow, this is like the business model that we need to figure out. And that's how we got started.
Nice. And Fernando, do you remember around what year that was? Those early days?
Yeah. So we made the switch in December of 2014. That's when we found the course, and then started learning.
Air quotes, found the course.
Yeah, found the course, yeah. And then, it's on the sidewalk, weirdly. And then we launched our first products in March of 2015.
Okay, cool. And is that the brand that you ended up exiting, or did it morph from there over the years?
It morphed from there. So we ended up building more of like a holdings company where we would just like launch a bunch of different brands across, just depending on the category and like the niche that we were targeting. But we ended up selling different brands to do them.
Okay, got it. So I guess let's walk through that. So like 2014 to 2021, that's like, again, I would call that OG status in the Amazon game. I think anybody that was pre 2018 or 2019, you kind of saw some stuff in the early days, and it definitely had first mover advantage, and just kind of like there was a completely different environment in terms of access to information and just.
Oh man, yeah.
I always say you have more. That was the ballsy era of Amazon. Like you just had to have the balls to just go into the unknown and see what happens. So kudos to you guys for doing that. Walk me through that like 6 to 7 year kind of span, because I think most people in the Amazon space now are probably have had their brands for less than 3 years, just for when people have gotten into it. So that's a long veteran life kind of timeline for a Amazon brand owner. So maybe walk me through that 7 years. I'd like to hear all your guys' stories and some of the battle wounds maybe, and just kind of the experience building those brands up.
Yeah, I can do the early years, maybe Nick, and then you can do like the later years. I mean, in the early years, totally wild west. It was crazy. I mean, I think, so we launched with 4 products right out of the gate. Basically 3 failed. 1 was like, okay, and then we would keep reordering. Eventually didn't do well. But like Nick mentioned, we surpassed like all 6 months of revenue on Shopify within the first month of Amazon. So we were like, okay, even though these failed, like we know that like they're just not as profitable or ROI that we're like shooting for. And so we got like really smart quickly about like, okay, what worked, what didn't. And then we just kept iterating like that, kind of like, the tech strategy, I guess. And then we just kept getting better and better at product selection. And then I think in June of that first year, we hit our first like home run, which was like, I mean, it's just like lucky, right? But it was like over 100K a month product, within like the first few months. And then I just naturally what you learn with like an inventory based business is that you need a lot of cash if you end up hitting like a home run like that. And then so it was this like kind of chicken and egg game where we'd demonstrate a ton of sales, borrow more money from like friends and family at like really high interest rates, just trying to keep this thing in stock, introducing more products. And then so we ended up doing 2.3 million in revenue year 1. We got to like 7 year 2, like 10 year 3. But I mean, it was insane. Like it was just hiring, a bunch of people, figuring out like some were really good, some weren't, like, really just kind of revamping like a ton of our hiring procedures and our team. And I would say that was like the first few years. We expanded probably, in hindsight, definitely too quickly. I think we expanded to like UK and Canada and US across different brands, and then Walmart, eBay as well. And so I think in hindsight, like from those early years, I probably would have just focused on like Amazon US, especially because I think we would have ended up doing a lot better versus like the incremental changes that you have from all those other marketplaces.
So that's frankly pretty baller status. Year 1, kind of cranking out multi 7 figures and then scaling to 8. So Nick, why don't you talk us through the growing pains of doing that? Because that's not an easy feat, whether it's people, money, the stress of Amazon.
Oh,
I
man.
mean, that's a lot going on from a loft in LA. So maybe talk through those growing pains and what does it take to do that? Because I think a lot of people honestly see the screenshots, right? And it's alluring. You see, okay, bam, these guys hit 2.4 million and then they went to 10. I think what a lot of people don't realize is to do 10 million in revenue, you got to order $3 million worth of stuff. And when you're cutting those POs and you're using cash that's kind of barely there to kind of pull back into the business, it's not a fun feeling in many respects. So maybe walk through those growing pains and what it took, and frankly, what it took to actually push the chips in at that level, because it takes, I think, a different level, of thought to be able to push the chips in at that level versus just placing a $5,000 order for your first product.
Yeah. I mean, man, I where do I begin with the growing pains? I feel like, we're still hitting growing pains, but probably not at the level we did before. I mean, I think what happens naturally when you're scaling that fast is that you're trying to keep up with all the demand. You're trying to keep up with all the ordering. You're trying to drive more revenue, but you're not really realizing what's happening at the bottom line. I think that was our big initial lesson. I mean, besides obviously cash flow, that we had to have, and, getting cash to actually support that revenue. What we realized, because we were scaling so quickly, we started going to other markets, expanding as fast as we can. We realized quickly that, as we were looking at the numbers, and it was at that point taking us like 2 months to get our accounting in order, we'd get it for 2 months later. And we were like, wow, actually these numbers aren't looking as good as we had hoped. And so that was the big thing we realized. We realized that we weren't really tracking our profitability. And that was back before they even had any kind of profitability tools like Subtle Legend or anything like that. Everything had to be done through Excel. And so that was a big lesson for us, really making sure that we understood, okay, well, what are we profitable on a SKU level? How profitable are we on a SKU level? How profitable is our business as a whole? Really having a good understanding of your expenses, because all of those things can add up incredibly quickly, whether it's the fulfillment, the inbound shipment, the advertising fees, and those aren't things that Amazon makes it easy for you to see. They really just glorify in a top line overview revenue metric. I mean, I'm sure there are so many sellers that are losing money and they don't even know it. And so that was definitely a big learning lesson for us. We definitely had to make some hard decisions along the way. Like once we realized that at one point we had to let go of employees, because of that difficult decision. And it was just crazy because our revenue was increasing. We had never had so much revenue, but our bottom line was actually shrinking, partially because we weren't tracking these things, but also because, there was a lot of margin compression happening with a lot of competitors coming into the space. And I would say that was another lesson that we learned down the line, which was really staying focused in your categories and making sure that you're consistently monitoring your competition and you're not getting too aggressive about expansion into other categories, because what's going to happen is there's not a high moat when it comes to Amazon, at least initially when we're launching products. And so, other people are going to eat your lunch. And that was a big thing that we had to learn as well. Like products that were really popular for us, a year ago, suddenly were actually being huge liabilities for us from a cash perspective. And we had to fervently drop those out of the picture. And so if we had kept our eyes on the ball, we probably could have extended the life cycle of a product much longer. But that was definitely a really hard lesson for us to learn.
No, man, I think it's such a good point. I think the tough thing about Amazon, and I think just kind of any business, frankly, is you've got to have a lot of discipline. Like a lot of people think, well, it's easy if I launch a product and it sucks and I'm stuck with 2,000 units and I can't sell it. Okay, that's an easy decision. You just got to kind of make the best of a crappy situation. It is much harder when you've got a product with 900 reviews that still doing, 50 grand a month in revenue or whatever the amount is. It's still actually making profit, but the profit isn't enough to buy the next batch of inventory because the ROI is not there. And it's a very difficult thing, but you can absolutely become a victim of your own success. And I think without discipline for ROI, like your return on capital, to buy future inventory and playing that game, right, I think it's a fundamental part. And one of I think the differentiators I see from people that are able to go from kind of mid 6 figures to low 7 figures into that 5, 10, 20 million, it's the discipline that goes into being able to kind of cut your losses, even though if they don't seem like losses, and just recognizing that cash can be used better elsewhere and allocating your capital appropriately. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And one thing I didn't touch on was also I think our biggest lesson probably, Fernando, maybe you agree, and it's something that we talk about still and we make it part of our business, is just, not only return on your capital and cash flow, but also how quickly you're turning over that cash, right? How many times you're turning it over.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I think is even more important now than ever is like, you have your money tied up on a boat over in China. It takes 3 months for you to get your
$20,000 boat.
Exactly. Yeah. Now 20,000. But on top of that, you're going to sell through your inventory in 3 months, and midway through selling that, you have to order more inventory. You're not really turning over your cash quickly enough. And so we had to figure out, like, looking at it in terms of, is it worth it to have higher margins and actually turn over our cash less frequently throughout the year? Or is it better for us to have less margin, but to be able to turn our cash more quickly through that year? And so those were things that we really had to look at a deep level. And, from a vanity perspective, some of the products that we cut, someone might not understand why, but the numbers all made sense for us. And it sucked because that meant less revenue, but ultimately better bottom line. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it just shows you the kind of sophisticated operators you guys are. And I think it's a testament to, that's the kind of stuff it takes to scale, right? I mean, it's just, you got to do the hard yards, and you got to make the hard decisions and the right decisions. And those incremental activities are really what snowball into something cool. Okay, so Fernando, we'll get into the exit story. I do want to ask a question first, because again, hanging on for 7 years and all the ups and downs in the Amazon game, and I'm sure a lot of your guys' personal net worth was kind of tied into that. Why didn't you sell sooner? It just kind of seems like maybe I personally probably would have had the itch to take, and I'm a little bit more risk averse than I think most. But why wouldn't you have sold 2 years ago when you first heard about Thrasio and you first heard about e-com businesses getting sold? And I'm sure you guys could have had a pretty life-changing payday even 2-3 years ago, but you hung on longer. Tell me, why that maybe you didn't even have that thought process, but what did you go through 2-3 years ago that made you kind of hang on and keep building the brands out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, at the time we were so focused on getting to 100 million revenue, usually it'll be me, but it'll just throw out this really ridiculous, top line number, okay, we need to get to this, for whatever reason. And then we'll kind of rally around it. And I think that was a big, a big milestone that we were shooting to get to. I think, over time, you just kind of realize that it's nice to take chips off the table. And I think one of the interesting things about our strategy has been creating lots of different brands versus being solely invested into one. And so it's okay, well, I can sell off one of these brands, and maybe it's one where it's truthfully, we're not as excited about it, or we don't really see a clear plan of how we're going to continue doubling this specific brand. And so it just makes sense, to take it off the table. But at the time, when Thrasio first launched, I remember I was at dinner with Ken from their team, and he was telling me they were doing these acquisitions at these multiples. And I think at the time we were doing 25 million a year, and I was there's no chance we would sell at that range. He's you're right, you're smart not to, but we're gonna get big enough to buy companies like yours. And I was dang, that's wild. And look at them now.
And that was 2 years ago.
That was in the fall of 2019. Yeah, so 2 years.
Okay,
it's crazy. 2 years to the day, pretty much.
It's crazy.
September. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, honestly, at the time, we just didn't see it as a. I mean, so much has changed. Obviously, we were talking before the call, but Thrasio at the time was the only aggregator besides one-on-one commerce, which didn't work out. But it wasn't this market where it was just so liquid in terms of Amazon businesses, and Flippa was around, but you just didn't hear about it as much. But now there's 80 Thrasio copycats, and so it's just a completely different time, truthfully, than 2 years ago.
Yeah, cool. Nick, was it kind of the same thing for you? You're just let's hit that 9-figure mark. Was that your? I kind of saw you shaking your head. Are you the conservative one that was no, let's take the chips off the table now?
Yeah, I mean, look, definitely, I think it's a good balance between myself and Fernando. Fernando's always shooting for the highest goal possible. I'm always the guy hey, are you sure? Do you need to do that? But I mean, I think the answer is usually what we find somewhere in the middle.
Nice.
And yeah, I mean, I think we were actually both on the same page for really shooting for that 100 million target. I mean, I think you learn your lessons along the way, and I think, definitely wish we had taken chips off the table sooner. Could have saved a lot of stress. But I think it's a good thing to learn, especially as you're on that path to scale. I think shooting for that 100 million target, it's not even so much about the money. I think, it's really about what you learn along the way and how you frame your mind in terms of thinking with having that goal. And so I think we both inherently knew that to be the case. And yeah, it was a fun thing to really shoot for.
Nice. All right, boys. Well, let's dive into the fun stuff, which is the exit experience. So let's maybe kind of sequence it in terms of what made you decide to sell, and then maybe how many of the brands of the overall fleet did you decide to kind of take chips off the table with. Broker, DIY, how you went to market, and then just walking through that kind of insane life experience, which I don't think, unless you've gone through it, truly understand both the emotional and like due diligence work and all the stuff that goes into kind of selling a business. Walk us through the trench warfare as well, but I'll let you guys kind of decide how you want to share that piece of the story.
Yeah, a great question. Yeah, I mean, so we went to market probably in May of 2020. We decided to work with Quiet Light. We talked to a bunch of the brokers. We'd known Joe for a while. And he's a great guy, always willing to give advice from their team. And then again, yeah, this is like before, all the aggregators were around. So at the time, we only knew of Thrasio and Perch. And so we talked to them. We weren't really excited about the values. And so we decided to go with Quiet Light. And how we decided to sell these specific brands, it was a lot of the brands that were being sourced from China, and like that we saw kind of inherently had kind of more of a lower ceiling than what we were shooting for. We've since then shifted it a lot more to U.S. made consumable products that, like Nick mentioned, have way faster cash conversion cycles, so it's a lot easier for us to scale these. And so. We went out to market. I think for the first 2-3 months, it was like we were getting like a few hits. It wasn't like anything super exciting, but it was also just right after COVID, right? So a lot of states
people
are still in lockdown.
Yeah.
Exactly. People are scared. A lot of people weren't buying. And so it was a very opportunistic time, I think, for buyers. Where I think a lot of people were I'm willing to buy, but I'm going to give you such a ridiculous offer. And so we were okay, we don't need the money that bad. And so I think as we were getting towards the tail end of summer, then I think more people started announcing that they were becoming aggregators. But then also people's fear of COVID and how it was going to impact e-commerce started dissipating. And so we ended up going pretty far with two teams, obviously one being D1, and then we just got a pretty amazing offer from D1, and that kind of made us choose them. I can go more into why I guess we chose D1 if that's helpful.
Yeah, I guess maybe Nick, what was your take on that, the conservative arm of the partnership?
No, I mean, I agree. I think we were on the same page of selling. Fortunately, Fernando took the ropes on really going through that entire process. But, in terms of working with the right person, I think right out the gate, we really loved working with D1 because they just got it very quickly. And they were really fair, I think, is a really important aspect too, in terms of, really not trying to nickel and dime you, but really making sure that you feel like this is fair to you and fair to them as well. So I really appreciated that. And yeah, it was a really, really solid experience. I'm fortunate in the sense that I did not have to go through everything that Fernando went. So I'm even more grateful that a partner that actually, handled that process entirely, because it certainly looked stressful.
Yeah. Nice. So I guess this is kind of unique because I people hear a lot about brokers and they hear a lot from the aggregators. It's very rare that you kind of hear the seller's take on the whole experience. So maybe just walk through the broker experience a little bit. And you kind of mentioned that you got kind of pretty aligned with D1 and there's a couple folks that were kind of in the running. Do you actually interact with the actual potential buyers when you're working through a broker? Does the broker do all the interactions for you? Is it this middleman? Maybe just to help folks understand a little bit about what that experience is like using brokers.
Totally. Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't think that all brokers are created equal. I think what they're supposed to do is screen out the the kind of time wasters, I guess you would say, and then find like, good suitors for you actually to meet with. And so they'll actually do, like, if it's a new potential buyer that they haven't worked with in the past, they'll actually like do a lot of the verification on the back end, like, basically figuring out like what types of companies do they buy and what size do they buy, like, do they have proof of funds, like, are they an actual like eligible like buyer. But I've heard, horror stories from other people that have gone with different brokers. I will say like Quietlight was phenomenal. Where I do think they did a lot of due diligence from all the buyers that we talked to, and so we didn't have anyone that was just kind of like wasting time or like trying to get like competitive info or anything else. But yeah, I mean, typically what will happen is you go through like this whole like form where you basically just like put together everything about your business, obviously like the financials, the story, like where it's going, what you're trying to do. You do like a video recording, like with both of us, kind of explaining, about the brand and everything else. It's a little bit more personal. And then it's like kind of like almost like a matchmaking service in a sense where they a very expensive one. But like, basically where you get, like introduced, and then the broker will be on the call, and then they'll just typically like, ask you questions. So they've already been screened at that point. But then it's just, it's really casual. It's like, hey, do you want my business? And then, so like, it's kind of, I mean, I think the more sophisticated buyers are like really good about building relationships, you realize. And then so they're not like, making it an interrogation right from the beginning, but they're just like trying to understand like who the seller is, like what their background is, like, why they're letting it go, things like that. But I would say like a good broker will take a lot of that like heavy lifting in terms of screening, so you're not wasting a ton of time. And then obviously have like the Rolodex as well.
Nice. Yeah, and I think it goes without saying. I mean, obviously, if you're selling a business, you want to maximize the financial opportunity, and a comfort level with the buyer that they actually can pull the trigger and make the money happen. Right. I think that's easily number one in terms of magnitude of decision making criteria when you're exiting a business. But I think maybe kind of talking about some of the softer things that maybe mattered in addition to that. I mean, I always talk a lot about alignment matters a ton with the transaction. Like you are about to go into the trenches with somebody for a period of time, and it's a significant life experience. I put it up there with a marriage or having a kid. I mean, it's up there for, unless you've kind of exited businesses all the time, for most people, it's going to be one of those life-changing moments in their life. So there is intangibles that matter. Maybe walk folks through some of the intangibles that you guys kind of had a discussion amongst yourselves about when you're kind of vetting buyers, in addition to the financials that maybe mattered for you.
I would say the main one for us is we had a lot of stuff going on. We were building other brands. We were building an agency. And so we didn't want like a ton of like hand-holding. So like our ideal buyer was someone that had already bought Amazon businesses before. So then like the transition would be really easy. We didn't want a long earnout. And so that was like, definitely kind of, I guess, tied more to the financial piece. And then it was just like people that you trusted. I think like Nick mentioned is like, you hear of a lot of deals where they'll kind of like, they'll send you a high ROI, and then for whatever reason, they'll kind of nickel and dime you afterwards. And so when we met, the D1 guys, we felt good about them. Like, we're kind of in the same circles of like a lot of other Amazon sellers. And so, even though we didn't know them like personally, or like not many people had worked with them at the time, you could just tell that they were good guys. And so like, I think that for us was like really, really important as well.
Yeah, it's funny how similar stories are. The same for me. It was like really good valuation, front end heavy, like wasn't like implicit on there now, which I think a lot of eggs, they kind of make their working capital shake out because they kind of splice it more on the back end and reduce some of their risk. And then just people, again, I think there's something about, when you know what I mean? It's like when you have conversations, when you become friends with people, you guys are frat brothers and have kind of been through the trenches for decades together, from drinking beers to building businesses to kind of making stuff happen. Like, your people when you know your people. And that's definitely one of my recommendations for folks that are going through an exit experience is like, listen to that voice in your stomach, assuming the math makes sense, right? Like if you like people to a point and then math matters, right? But, cause I met some people that I was super aligned with, but the math just didn't work. But when you can get those two things to work in concert, I think it's pretty special. Well, awesome, guys. I think that's phenomenal. And I think that story and kind of, moving from year 1 to year 7 or whatever it was and kind of pulling the trigger, it's got to be super rewarding. And, hat tip to you guys. I honestly believe that the entrepreneurs are my heroes, really. Like those are the people that I look up to the most in life, and because I know what it takes and I know what's on the line with it. So huge congratulations to you. So it sounds like you guys are still building businesses. We'll maybe kind of get a little bit into what's next for you, but I'm really curious to know advice for sellers that have maybe been in the game the last 6 months, because I think it is a pretty disconcerting period of time, because you've got you hear about, quote unquote, the glory days, although I don't know that there ever is or was glory days. And then because you guys didn't have data, whatever, you had your pirated course that you figured stuff out, but there's way less information out there, way less tools. Founded course. Yes, exactly. And then, just different eras, right? But I think the era that we're in now is, it's no direct shot from China to FBA on limited inventory. You've got to have kind of operational sophistication. There's uncertainty with operating costs. There's ads going up. Seemingly, you got all these aggregators that have raised $7 billion. Like, I talk to a lot of, call it newer sellers or newish sellers. Maybe they're already actively selling, and they're just like, man, is this should I be doing this? Like, had you to kind of rewind it? Could you pull it off now? So maybe give us your take, which is a little bit difficult because you have a little bit of that muscle memory from the experience you guys have had building brands. But for those that are kind of 6 months into it, how would you do it now? What do you think are the keys for the next era of Amazon, with both existing brands you've seen, clients, and other stuff? Give us your words of wisdom for those on the channel, and because I think you guys have obviously been through the gauntlet of Amazon. I'm curious to get your take on current era of Amazon.
Man, I mean, look, at this point, I would say combined with our own products and also our client products, we probably launched close to 500 products. So I think we have a very good understanding of what it takes nowadays. And it's weird because it's almost like the answer that would have worked back then, but we didn't really do that as much because there were so many other things we could have done. Like even 2014, you were buying reviews, you could do all these things, and you didn't really need a good product. But at the end of the day, you need a damn good product. I mean, there's going to be an unlimited amount of demand of people wanting new things, wanting the best thing. And what is defined as the best thing is always going to evolve and change. And so, I think really what it comes down to is your product the best? Is it differentiated? Are you creative enough to actually make those points stand out? Is there a way to make your product so different that people have to click on it when they're looking for something new? I think those are the things that we didn't put as much effort into back then, because it was I'm going to sell this and add a 2-pack, or I'm going to sell this and then I don't know, drop my price. Those aren't long-term strategies. More and more Amazon is making it so that it's important for you to build a brand. It's important for you to speak to a specific audience. They're giving you the free keyword data. And so the information is there for you to look at to really figure out how you can differentiate your product. And those little things that you do that make your product different is what's going to add value. And also make it so that people aren't setting your price for you. If you're selling a commoditized product, the market has set your price. You're limited by that. But if you can somehow differentiate your offering to where there isn't a price on it and people think, hey, I'm willing to pay for this because it's so different and it meets my needs, it hits these specific keywords, and it matches that, and it's so unique compared to other products that are offering that same thing, then you are positioned to win, I think in the long term. Obviously, your numbers have to work. I also think that you definitely need a lot more capital than you used to. I think, back then, to launch a product effectively, maybe, you needed 20 grand, I would say now, with COGS and everything, it could be anywhere from 50 to 100 grand, to really make it effective. I think it's correlated between how differentiated your product is and, and how much you have to spend to launch your product. If it's very not differentiated, you have to spend a lot more to launch your product, right? And even then, maybe it will work. But if it's incredibly differentiated in a low competitive market, you're not going to have to do as much. PPC could work. But if it's very competitive, very differentiated, maybe you could spend less money than you would if it weren't differentiated. So, I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to being really creative and 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 just having a really damn good product, because that's going to make everything, easier along the way.
Dude, yeah, that's honestly such a value bomb. I mean, that's going to be a sentiment that I fundamentally believe in too. And just everything is easier when you have the right offer and you've kind of thought out. And I think that you could get away with not being as sophisticated in that arena before and use kind of other Amazon skills to be able to kind of make things work. But it's becoming more and more fleeting for a lot of the reasons you talked about. So, dude, huge value bomb on that. Fernando, anything to add from your perspective on what's next for Amazon as sellers look at how do they make their dent in the universe?
No, I mean, I completely agree with everything Nick said. I think, maybe thinking about it in another perspective is just having a more long-term focus. I think, a lot of like the hacks that were around in 2015, 2016 are like, gone. I think like the era of launching a ton of like commodity products is quickly dissipating, and it's like a very short lifespan. And so thinking about like, before, like, if you looked at our, our cash flow statement, like we launch a product, take that cash and then reinvest it into another product because it was easy to do and it was quick. I think now, if you think about it, like it's probably more so like you're doing a more hero SKU that's like differentiated. You're putting a lot of like marketing power behind it. You're actually trying to build a brand. And then instead of like reinvesting always into like this new product, which is like the easier thing to do, where you're completely concentrated on Amazon, you start like really figuring out like, whether it's like an influencer strategy or like a Facebook ads strategy, or actually building something that has more of a moat. Because I think it's going to be harder and harder to find these kind of like private label products that will do really well and have like a long-term like product life cycle on Amazon. So I think it's about reinvesting into other more defensible moats that are actually like attractive to the aggregators and to the buyers of the future of them.
Great advice, man. Well, turning our page to, I guess, the last chapter, which is kind of what's next for you guys. So you got, not that you didn't have money in the bank before, but you maybe have a little bit more money in the bank than you used to. You've got a little bit maybe less stress on the day-to-day, kind of, with some of those chips off the table. I always call it like playing with the house's money, right? You're playing with the house's money at this point, and you've got the skills to kind of crack the casino, so to speak. So what's next for Fernando and Nick, and kind of what can we expect out of you guys the next couple of years?
I mean, we built an agency. So, we service a lot of CPG consumable brands that are US based. And that's really kind of been the main focus for us the last 2 years. I think it's interesting because a lot of the agencies that currently exist in the market, these are guys that are basically glorified, marketing agencies. They aren't people who've actually been in the ditches fighting the war against Amazon. And, we actually come from a background where we have that operational experience. So we've really dealt with so many different situations and scenarios that I think it adds a lot of value to the clients that we work with, because we can really actually treat it like our own business. So I think it's been incredible because we get so much experience. I mean, we get to launch so many products and we learn so much, and we enjoy just getting better at what we do. The obvious side benefit is also we don't have the risk of having to own that inventory. But we take a cut because we're able to help grow their business. So it's been a natural transition because we still had the team from after we sold. And nice. So it was a great transition of being able to just, turn ourselves into a platform organization where we could just plug in brands and do the same things that we were doing, but at a higher level. We're really excited about this because I think, a lot of the brands that we service, these CPG companies, they're really good at merchandising for, the retail shelf. They're really good at merchandising for their store, but they really have no idea how to merchandise for Amazon. And so for us, not only we're executing on the day-to-day, but we're also acting as really, strategic advisors that can even inform the product development side, so that then when they develop their product, they are well merchandised to really tackle all those three channels. And they can really win against their competitors, because a lot of these guys don't even know who they're competing against on Amazon. And so that's where we can help them from the very beginning all the way to execution, launch, and management.
So that's super cool, because I think that of the fronts of your kind of more traditional Amazon native private label kind of brand builder, you've got kind of a couple scenarios that are at play. One, you've got a lot of foreign competition, which, is kind of the race to the bottom, and how do we kind of succeed? Because there is a certain price where it doesn't make sense even for differentiated offers. So you got that kind of flank. You've got the aggregators who maybe don't have the incremental operating experience that a solopreneur in the space has, but they also have scale and other assets that they have at their disposal. And then you've got these large brands who obviously carry with them pretty big weight in terms of consumer mindshare and omni-channel experience. But they also have, like, a lot of them survive, frankly, on branded search. It's people typing in Tide dishwash or whatever. Like, when they type in dishwash, they maybe aren't, like, hitting the mix of people that are on the top kind of 5 organic positions of Amazon. I'm making that up. Maybe Tide is a bad example. But what are you seeing from these, like, e-com directors, which I'm assuming you're kind of working with folks in the e-com segment of these larger enterprises? How are they thinking about Amazon? Is this like, look, I just want to check the box, and I know my boss wants to see my Amazon channel numbers, and if I'm getting 90% branded search and that's how I'm winning, and it's just giving existing consumers another place to shop, we're fine with that? Or do you see them looking at this more like, okay, Nick and Fernando, over the next 5 years, we want to win this category space on Amazon because our shelf space in groceries and other retailers is becoming more fleeting, and we don't quite know how to do that yet? How do you see them looking at that channel mix and Amazon specifically as they tackle that space?
I think it really depends on who you're talking to and what brand. I think it's different for each brand. But generally, I think, some people will be like, hey, I don't want to be on Amazon. I don't like Amazon. Other people will openly welcome it, But I think what is true for every single one of the clients that we work with and every prospect that I talk to is they realize they have to be on Amazon. It's the 800-pound gorilla that you need to be on. If you aren't, you're losing because, customers are going to Facebook and they're getting hit by your ad, and then they're looking for your product on Amazon. So, whether you want to be on Amazon or not, you are losing sales by not being there. And so, we see our role as really just helping them navigate that space effectively and leveraging our skill sets to help them tackle and, basically modify their strategy based off of what they're really trying to achieve. I would say that more recently, because of the Facebook algorithm update, what we're seeing is that, a lot of these companies, because they have poor attribution, they can't even tie, their attribution to the ad that they're spending to their website. So, with Amazon, strangely enough, it's a lot more clear cut because it's a closed, world, right? It's a walled garden. So you can directly attribute, your paid media spend. And so what we're starting to see is a lot of people are reallocating their budgets from, social media spend to paid media on Amazon because, you can directly measure your ROAS targets, your ACoS targets. But I think at the end of the day, all these brands, realize that Amazon is a place that they need to play. And even, what's surprising to me is that, I'm starting to talk to some investors who, will say that, oh, they have no issue with a brand being mostly on Amazon. And that's been surprising to me because a lot of Amazon sellers will see that as like a negative thing. But, I think, traction is traction for a lot of these investment companies. And I think the tide is definitely going to change, in terms of where those sales come from. But at the end of the day, omni-channel really matters for these brands, and they know that.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, I think what's cool about you guys kind of parlaying your skills into the agency world and kind of going after these really predominant brands and helping them scale on Amazon, which is kind of a testament to why we all get into this in the first place. We get into this because we want to live life on our terms. I think that's kind of what it comes down to for most folks. And you can do that by building a highly profitable Amazon brand. You can do that by exiting a brand. But I think throughout the process and all the ups and downs, I think for folks to realize that if you're in the Amazon trenches for years and you're kind of putting in the hard yards and you're passionate about and obsessed with the channel and have a lot of knowledge, it's a pretty indispensable skill. I don't think there's very few people really smart, really financially backed, highly financially backed folks that don't quite have the skills to pull it off, right? So I think that you guys have kind of shown, obviously you're sophisticated operators to begin with, but the skill sets that we're building, I kind of equate it to coders, right? Like coders in the Valley are very difficult to come by and they can kind of name their price. I see a universe where there are, brand directors and or agency folks that help chaperone brands into the Amazon ecosystem and do that effectively as being a pretty highly coveted skill set. So, when Amazon suppresses your listing and you feel like your life's over, you probably have a bigger safety net than you actually think, both in terms of being able to exit your business and or kind of parlaying that skill into monetizing it elsewhere. So, well, gents, I've taken a decent amount of your time. Truly intriguing story, and I kind of knew you guys as OG kind of Amazon folks, but you never quite know if they're the flashy all talk and show and no substance. But you guys clearly have a ton of substance and are super sophisticated. And I love how you guys think about the space. And what you guys have pulled off has been truly impressive. And I'm really excited to see where you guys kind of take things next. It sounds like you guys are going to be on the scene for a while. So really appreciate it. Is there any shameless plugs you guys want to make for the Heist audience to come find you guys after the fact? And if they want to learn more, work with you, understand you guys in any other respects, shameless plug time.
Yeah, if anybody ever wants to reach out, you can reach out to us. The firm that we work with, or the agency that we run now, is marketplaceops.com. But yeah, feel free to ever reach out to me, Fernando at Marketplace Ops, or Nick at Marketplace Ops, and we're happy to help in any way that we can.
Yeah. And that's marketplaceops.com, in case you didn't catch that. So feel free to shoot us a note.
Nice. I'll drop a link down below, and I'll pin a comment as well. So if anybody wants to dig it up, I think that's awesome. So, well, again, gentlemen, it was honestly a pleasure. Again, thanks for being the first Exit Series interview. I think it was a doozy, and really enjoyed chatting with you guys. And again, I'm looking forward to see what you guys do next. But it was fun hour time.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
So how awesome was Fernando and Nick's story? If you like this interview and want more, we're going to be dropping a video around the middle of every single month. So hit subscribe if you haven't already. And again, if you're looking to exit your business, I can't say enough good things about D1 Brands. I've actually invested in them. They're an amazing company, and I'm super excited to see where they go and how many exit stories they can create from the Heist community. If you want to hear my story on how I sold my business, check out the next video. And until next time, cheers.